right. Well, welcome to season 4 of The Unbroken Ground. This is the first episode. It's been a little bit delayed. I've been doing some other things. Haven't been able to dedicate any time to this hobby of mine. But that season of time where I don't have a lot of extra free time to do things for hobby's sake, now they're back. I'm able to do this. So I put it out yesterday that this was coming out, and so I didn't want to disappoint my tens of fans, and so gotta get it out there. I am weird. If you listen long enough to this podcast, or if you listen to Gemini Talk, you'll know that that's true. And I have a strange idea for all of the titles of the season 4 episodes. As much as I can go, they're going to be lines from an album put out by a band called the Postal Service. And this is a band that they were only together because they were a break off from Def Cab for Cutie and some other band I forget, but they created their greatest hit was Such Great Heights, which was then covered by Iron and Wine on some random movie. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, one of my favorites to listen to, and the first episode is going to be titled, and again, this is a line from one of their songs, not a title to their songs, but a line from one of their songs. This happens to be from This Place Is a Prison. It has one of the best drum beats that I have heard, and so I love that about it. But this episode is going to be called These People Aren't Your Friends. So if you know the Postal Service and you've listened to that album over and over again like I have, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, maybe you're looking for some fun music to dive into and feel good about emo from the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, then you have a new people to look up called the Postal Service. Like I said, they're made up with some people from Def Cab for Cutie, also another great 90s, 2000s emo band. I recommend listening to them as well. But that's why that's the name of this episode. It also fits into what I'm talking about. Will that always be the case? I don't know. There's a lot of lyrics, so we'll see. I don't always know what I'm going to talk about before I start this thing, so you never know. But welcome to season 4, and you can always join in a conversation if you want. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, Gmail at The Unbroken Ground. But those are ways to reach out to me. So like and subscribe, I guess I should say those kind of things. That's what influencers say, right? And you can find this anywhere. Obviously, you're listening somewhere, but it should be on Apple and YouTube and Spotify and all the places. So thanks for listening, and let's dive in. So, these people aren't your friends. There is a main piece that I wanted to talk about, and it actually relates to, I think, my last podcast that I did for season 3, as I was finishing up that, maybe the second to last one, where we're talking about the idea of the opposite of love, and how the opposite of love is not hate, but it's actually indifference. And as I was scrolling through threads here recently, I came across a thread that I almost replied to, and my rule about getting into theological and political debates online is that I don't. I try not to, because I don't think that they are healthy. And actually, some of this you'll understand, or they're helpful. Understand as I explain what I'm about to talk about as I go through this. It'll be like, oh, this is why I think that. Already off to a great rabbit trail start. So the thread itself was talking about the idea that Jesus tells us to, in the Beatitudes, to love our enemies. And I think that well, let me, before I get into I think that, let me get into and they specifically were having this discussion about whether they had to love ICE agents who have, done some terrible things, or specifically the ones that have, in most people's minds, have seen, if not unmerited, actual, like, the spectrum is they shouldn't have done what they have done. That's not wasn't called for, or they just, the other side is they just straight up murdered someone, and it's like, do I have to love those people? And I think the question better to ask is actually the question that the Jews asked Jesus when he was talking about loving their neighbors, not just loving your enemies, but loving your neighbors, is they, immediately knew that the next question they should ask is, well, then who then is my neighbor? If I have to love my neighbor, who's my neighbor? And Jesus answers that question in kind of a roundabout way, as he often does. He tells a story, and then that has one of the weirdest, for the people of the time. It would not have been a hero normally of a story that was being told, but that's who he chose to be the hero, obviously making a point about who your neighbor is. But what I would say is that in our world of onlineness, of people who we feel like we have a connection to, a reach to, it's not a relationship, but it's like, we know, like, if you can follow someone online, and you can see their posts, you can see the things that they let you in to see, and you feel like you are part of their, like, you're like, I do know them. They are my neighbor. And I think that actually defeats, in a lot of ways, and it allows us to escape a lot of ways, the really the thrust of what Jesus is talking about. And I think that for me, I generally don't do. So I will freely admit, I generally don't do the whole, what's your word for the year? Some people do. It's great. I'm not saying don't do it. It's just not something I usually do. But even without really having a word, I've just been bombarded by just these, time and time again, having these conversation thoughts, these activities where I'm like, community. My word is community. I want to understand what it means to create, to live in, and to build my community, because I think that Jesus, when he's talking to us about loving our enemies, like, we do we can try to Jesus juke Jesus, which doesn't ever work, but we can try, and we can be like, oh, you mean I have to love, like, that person that I don't actually know, that they're my enemy. And the truth is, let's take a very polarizing figure, Donald Trump. Is he your enemy? Well, some people are like, no, he's my hero. Some people are like, yes, he stands for everything I don't agree with in a lot of ways. And but he doesn't know who you are. Like, you don't have a relationship with him. You don't speak into his life. You don't have, like, you can read the words that somebody, who knows if it's even him, putting it out on the internet, but that's not really kind of the idea. Jesus is talking to people who lived and breathed and existed within communities that they saw the people who were their quote unquote enemies, their neighbors. They lived amongst them. They were the ones that saw them daily, and they knew about them, and they could choose to ignore them, but they had interaction with them. And most of the people that we interact with or follow online, we don't. They don't know us. They might like a comment you put on there. You might like something they say, but you're really not friends. You're really not in community with them. Now, caveat, rabbit trail. Let me say this. There are some people that you can meet and grow a community online and have friends. I'm not saying you can't do that, but in the idea of in the global world, when we're thinking about who is my enemy or who is my friend or who is my neighbor, while the general answer is yes, everybody should be seen as one of those things, that you should love everyone, whether or not they are enemy or not, that you love them as yourself and you should treat that. But a lot of times we like to play this pretty impractical, honestly, game where we're like, well, do I have to love, quote unquote, this politician? Do I have to love Trump? Do I have to love Obama? And the truth is you love God's creation you pray for him. You hope the best for them. You for those places that you can speak truth to them, you do. But for the most part, they're not actually part of your community. They're not part of your circle. They affect you in some ways, because as like a president, they make laws and they help. They don't make laws. They sign in the laws. Anyway, sorry, you know what I'm saying. I'm not saying they make laws. Executive orders maybe. But anyway, but it's pretty one way. And I think Jesus is talking to us to get us to see the type of relationships that you have at your work, in your families, in your churches, in your community groups, like your neighborhoods. Those are the ones that we should focus on 90% of the time. Not do I have to love some person on the news that I only hear about, I don't experience, I don't have a relationship with, I don't have actually conversations, I don't communicate with. Do I have to love that person? And the answer is yes, but honestly, what does that mean? Well, for most people who you don't interact with, that just means thinking positively about them. It doesn't mean you can't critique them. It doesn't mean you can't say, I don't agree with their policies, their choices. But it just in general means that you will honor them as a child of God, because everyone that's here is a child of God, and they deserve that honor and respect of that. They deserve to be loved in as much as the sense of the word that you should care about their, pray for them, but they're not your community. They're not who you're going to spend most of your time relating to, and so when we go off on that kind of tangent and look out and like, oh, do I have to love X, Y, and Z, that person that's not there? A lot of times we do that because it's actually harder to love the people that we have to interact with every day, that are a part of our families, that are in our communities, that are our neighbors. And we disassociate so much from that because we proclaim that we are getting all of our social interaction. We can do that on the web. We don't need the people next to us. We don't need. And so we live isolated, lonely, unconnected lives. And we miss out on what Jesus is trying to say when he says you have to love your enemy. And honestly, their enemies generally are going to be people who are in the midst of your life. And I think we should be wise to know that there are people who, you know, enemy is kind of used here because what we allow ourselves to make into the enemy is often someone we don't know. Is something we don't know. So for example, as Jesus tells a story, when the Jesus's contemporaries ask him, well, who is my neighbor? You know, who is my enemy? Most of the Jews would have gladly said that they were enemies with all Samaritans. This is mostly because they Samaritans and Jews came from the same place. They were Israelites. The Samaritans occupied the northern kingdom, which eventually fell into different kinds of worship, even though they were supposed to be dedicated to worshiping the one true God. And then the southern kingdom, which was mostly made up of Judah and Benjamin, I believe. Going off the top of my head here. Sorry if I'm wrong. You guys look it up. You can correct me. But anyway, the southern kingdom saw themselves as the true followers of God, and they thought that the people from Samaria had betrayed them, and they were because they knew better. And because they had, and then there's just lots of then strife in history that existed for many, many years between the two kingdoms. They hated the people who, because they were a reminder of there what once was this unified nation, and these were people who had turned against God in their eyes. And that's why when you have Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman at the well in John, she says, well, your ancestors say that they have to worship at the temple, and my ancestors say we got to worship at the mountain. And Jesus was kind of like, you guys are both missing the point. But that's who the Jews would have seen the Samaritans as an enemy, because they were they should have been like them, but they weren't. And so then that whole group of people became less than they were seen as like, we don't have to treat them as people. They're our enemies. They've abandoned God. We don't even have to see them. And so when Jesus introduced this, this neighbor concept, and somebody says, well, who's my neighbor? He basically shocks the Jews by saying, like, yeah, who was the hero? And if you read the text, like the legal expert can't even bring himself to say it was a Samaritan. He said it was the man who helped the man who was beaten and healed, and helped him heal him. And because he couldn't bring himself to say, most likely, he couldn't even say it, that the Samaritan was his neighbor, that the Samaritan was the hero of that story, because he had so much hatred of that person. And the fact was, it probably, at this stage of this feud between the two different factions and countries, most of the Jews didn't even have a personal interaction with Samaritans. They just knew they had to hate them. And I've talked about this before, and I think it's super important. The idea of what Jesus is talking about is, Jesus is like, the people around you, the people you interact with, the people you interact with a lot, you're called to love them. And if you have someone that you feel like you've got this broken relationship with them, then you do your work to fix it. You do everything you can. You love them as you love yourself. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You 1 Corinthians 13 them with, like, love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love remembers no wrongs. Like, you take action, because again, love is where we have in the modern world, American society, we have pushed love into this idea of, like, kind of this feeling, this concept And I think biblically, love is the actions, the words, the thoughts. They're the very tangible things that you do, and they may or may not have emotion with them. Love does not have to have an emotion with it, because love is what you do. Love is how you talk. Love is how you see. Love is how you react. Love is how you move forward. And so we can choose to love, even those people who seem to not want us to be blessed or have success or be happy, or just any of those things for whatever reason. We did something to offend. We just existed, so they became offended. Like it doesn't really matter. Jesus is like, if you have people in your community, in your orbit, your goal is to love them, and to do that well, and when we push that out to these distant relationships that we don't really have any kind of interaction with, we kind of begin to be like, well, it just kind of breaks apart. It would be like, to say one of the most, controversial or shocking things that you could use in this argument is like, well, do you have to, when you were, when Hitler was alive, were Christians supposed to love Hitler? And that's a pretty hard question to answer, because what we know is that, as far as we can tell, there is no escape clause on who you're supposed to love. But I think, again, we are supposed to love our neighbors, and unless you lived in that country, he was not a neighbor. Doesn't mean you're not supposed to, treat them with kindness, and once if they were to come into your orbit, that you would be that your neighbor. But loving doesn't mean that you let people just do whatever they want. Loving isn't just a warm, fuzzy emotion that you just allow people to do or say whatever they want. In fact, like, God talks about this in the Bible. He's like, love, disciplining someone is loving. And I'm not talking about, necessarily physical discipline. You guys can debate that. I don't have kids, so I'm not. But helping someone have boundaries, creating boundaries, is a loving thing. Helping someone see when they are doing things that are harmful to themselves or others is a loving thing. Now, again, you may not be able to, you may need to have wisdom of where and how and what to be able to speak truth into people's lives. You need to come from a place of humility and love, not in a place of judgment and arrogance and ultimatums. That you're going to be like me, you got to think like me. But rather, like, if you really love someone, like if you really want to see the best for them, and you read, God's word, and you're trying to live your life in the best way, and you see someone else and you're like, wow, they seem to not be understanding or know or don't know, or maybe they see it different. Maybe we just need to have a discussion about why they are living a certain way, and maybe we need to have a discussion about why you think boundaries and different lifestyle or anything like that might be part of that discussion. But you do it from a place of community and loving, of the same way that you'd want somebody, if they saw you doing things that were going to be dangerous, destroying to your life, you'd want somebody to approach you. And most of the time, if we were honest with ourselves and with other people, we don't want somebody just yelling at us or telling us that we're wrong. Like, we don't respond well to that. No one does. And so, like, loving someone, whether you agree with everything they do or not, then that's not, like, you don't get a pass to not love your neighbor just because they do something you don't agree with. You don't get a pass to cut somebody out of your life unless we got to be healthy. You don't have to. Loving someone does not mean that you have to receive abuse. does not mean you don't have to allow yourself to be abused. It's loving sometimes. Like I say, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to offer discipline and boundaries, is to offer truth that comes from God in a loving way, in a way that's like, I want to restore and continue this relationship, but we can't do that if these things are going on. Like that takes wisdom, and it takes health, and it takes maturity, and we're just not good at that. And so a lot of times we just resort to being like, all right, I'm cutting you off, you're gone, you're done. I don't want to talk with you. And again, there may even be some relationships, some things out there where that is what you need to do. The most loving thing may be saying, look, we can't continue in communication, we can't continue in community while you're going down this path. I think that's what you see Paul do, and when he's talking to the church, and he's like, hey, you have people who are doing this, X, Y, Z, they can't continue in communion with you until they stop. And the most loving thing to do is to set up that boundary, and to explain that boundary, and to walk through that boundary with them, and to talk with them, and to try to restore them, to try to help them see the things that you're seeing, but also listen to them. Again, Paul's he's writing a letter trying to give encouragement, but I think he would want the leaders of that church to yes, set those boundaries, but also to open up making sure the communication is there to restore. I mean, that is always the theme of any time that you do any kind of boundary setting or any kind of discipline, is to restore the relationship, and to find a balance or a place where this community can continue. And when we instead put into this place, or when we begin to believe that what Jesus is talking about, love, is like, well, harmony, we're all going to think the same way, we're all going to believe the same things, we're all going to be on the same page. That is a type of community, but that is not the only type of community. There actually is this beautiful picture where Paul begins to be like, hey, look, there's no Greek, there's no Jew, there's no Roman, there's no male, there's no female, there's no rich, there's no poor, there's like we're just people, right? And when we start to label people and dividing people out, like Paul's like, no, that's not the vision of what the body of Christ is. It's not the vision of what it means to follow Jesus. And what's so difficult, it continues to be difficult, and we'll I think we'll continue to struggle with this, is that we have made it fully about, in a lot of ways, like, you can be part of my community as long as you believe exactly the way that I believe. And salvation is then determined by the percentage of theology that you get right according to my scale of testing. And so as long as you believe all the things I believe, and as long as you believe exactly like me, then you're part of my community, and you have salvation. And we have put the right theology only. We have substituted only believing in right theology instead of and giving it giving it the spot of assent. Like, I believe, I in my brain I think these thoughts, I can confirm these thoughts. That's where salvation is in this acknowledgement of beliefs. But we miss the other side. We miss the other side. Because if you believe something but it doesn't change the way that you live, do you really believe it? I mean, if you really believe something, if you truly believe something, you truly agree with that, but it doesn't change the way you live, do you really believe it? And I think for Jesus and Paul, like, that the answer is if you say that you believe in the things that Jesus and Paul wrote and said, but you don't, it doesn't change how every part of your life is, then do you really believe that? And so, and this is where you get, this is where it gets into like, I think this is why Paul writes things like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because just agreeing to a set of beliefs written down on a piece of paper, a covenant, is not what Paul is talking about when he's talking about salvation, when Jesus is talking about salvation. In fact, Jesus more than anything else said, you'll know you are my follower when you obey my commands. Your belief will be demonstrated by what you do. He goes on to say, your belief will be on display like fruit on a tree. You'll be known by what you do. So if people know what you do and it's a lot of bad fruit and it's not the fruit of salvation, then you're doing it wrong. James is this is one of the things, like famously Luther did not like the book of James, because Luther was like, we're only, rabbit trail, here we go. I don't know, maybe in season 4 I'll try to call out all the rabbit trails I take on. Maybe we'll come back to this place, maybe we won't. I know my podcast just wander all over the place, and so far nobody has stopped listening for that I know of, because they didn't tell me, and that's okay, I don't want you to tell me, but man, that was a rabbit trail about rabbit trails. Ooh, man, it's deep. But here's the thing, Martin Luther is the guy that started the Reformation, which was what most, especially Reformed Christians, but most Christians who aren't Catholic, and even some Catholic Christians would believe that the Catholic Church had gotten off path. And it was, depending on who the Pope was, depending on the political climate, at that time it was kind of a political body, and they were doing such things as selling indulgences, meaning that you could buy people's way into heaven by donating to the church. All of that, which is really bad. I don't think there's very few, I would argue, very few people in the Catholic faith today who would be like, yeah, no, we want to go back to that. We really think that's a good theology of, that some famous, I forget whichever famous cardinal it was, but it was like every time a coin rings, a soul sings, some catchy, even back then they had catchy catchphrases, but I don't think there's people today would be like, yeah, no, we should go back to that. And Luther, Luther, who was a monk in the Catholic Church, because that was the only option. You could have been Eastern Orthodox, but mostly where Luther in Germany was not really an option, because people who were not the Catholic Church, you had things called inquisitions, where they searched out heretics and they killed them. So Luther's a Catholic. He's a monk. He's studying the Bible, and he's seeing these kind of corruptions of the Catholic Church in Rome and all these things, and so he writes these theses that he then goes and nails to the wall, and I haven't studied him in a long time, so I can't tell you without. But basically, what it comes down to is that Luther, in reaction to the Roman Catholic faith idea of tradition, where you have to be baptized, and you have these sacraments within the Catholic Church at that time, that you had to be baptized and you had to have the last rites and all that, and that's how you got salvation. Luther was like, nope. Paul says, by faith alone. Faith alone is what saves you. And only God can save you, only through faith. And that faith by the way, is just a gift from God. So if you have faith, it's because God gave you faith, and that is the only thing that saves you. There's no works. You don't have to say Hail Marys. You don't have to give any kind of money to the church. You don't have to do anything to get saved, because you are saved by faith alone. It's by faith and God's grace. And that is all there is to it. And so Luther famously does not like the book of James, because James begins to talk about this idea of faith. And he's like, you can't have faith that doesn't have works. You can't say you have faith that isn't demonstrated in how you live. And he's like, if you say you have faith, and I say that's good, I show you my faith by what I do, what he's basically saying is, he's like, prove it. Prove it. You say you have faith, show me. And and what we have to understand fully is that James is not saying, if you want to be saved, then you'll have deeds, you'll have works that you'll do. He's not saying that. But what he is saying is, he said that oh my gosh, how about that for a tongue? Saving faith, I was trying to say I don't even know what word I was trying to say. Wow. Saving faith, he said, saving faith is always going to be demonstrated and shown by what you do. It's just the way it is. The one exception, of course, for that is like the thief on the cross, right? Where Jesus is, but even there, Jesus, he's saying, Jesus, when you come to your kingdom, like his words, his belief in who Jesus is, while they're hanging on the cross, it's demonstrating his belief, his faith. And Jesus is like, hey, you're going to be with me in paradise, right? Like yeah. The point, because the point is, and I try to tell this to everybody. I think I've been doing this podcast now for 4 seasons. I'm sure I've said this so many times, and I'll continue to say this. I tell this to the kids that I do discipleship with and Bible study. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. So we don't do things to earn salvation by earning God's love. It's not why you do things. That's not why you do good works. It's not why you do that. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. There's not enough good works in the world to do to make up for the sin that you do. That price is not able to be paid by you. That price is only paid by a pure and blameless holy lamb named Jesus and his death and resurrection. So there's nothing you can do. With all you could give all your money away. You could spend every day serving orphans and lepers in some foreign third world country where you denied yourself any pleasure and you suffered so that others could strive and live, and you could do all of that. But if you didn't have faith, if you didn't have that love for God that drives you to love God and love people, but if you're just doing it because you're trying to check a box that says, if I do this, I will show, I will earn, I will know, then I will be able to say to God, look at what I've done. The answer is no. That's not how salvation works. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. And when we go about life in that way, when we're like, and this is where it gets dangerous to me, to have cultural Christianity. Because we accept and we almost demand cultural norms in our churches, and so we begin to say, like, if you're saved, then so you guys have heard this before, but if you've listened to any at all, and if you're not, if this is your first time or you haven't heard this one, welcome to my story. I grew up in the South. I grew up in a very conservative church, a conservative place, a conservative family, and I grew up in a conservative town. We were a dry town. There was no alcohol in our town. If you wanted to get alcohol, you had to drive outside the city limits a mile, because it was like alcohol. You shouldn't drink alcohol. That was just, as a Baptist church where I was at, the people in my church didn't drink any kind of alcohol. And so I was 22. I remember this. It's one of those conversations. I don't remember a lot of my conversations, a lot of my things that, it's been a long time since I was 22. And I remember having a conversation with a guy who wanted to share Jesus with people. And he's like, I'll go sit in a bar. And I was like, well, you can't. You can't go sit in a bar and share Jesus with people, because the minute you step foot in a bar, you just show that you don't really love God. Because culturally, the idea was, like, if you love Jesus, then you won't drink alcohol. That was what the culture said. So if you wanted to prove that you love Jesus, then you just didn't drink. Because the people around you, the people that you went to church with, they didn't drink. And then we preached it, and then it was preached again, it's even from the pulpit. Like, there was and it wasn't like, don't do it in moderation. It was like, just don't do it. Don't even do it. It was prohibition. And that's prohibition. That's not the Bible. What does the Bible say? The Bible says don't be drunk. For some people, that means don't do it at all. Like, that's just, like, people who get addicted and can't control themselves, they probably should abstain. Like Paul talks about, he talks about the whole argument about meat, right? Where he's like, this meat is sacrificed to idols. But I happen to know that those gods are fake, so I don't care where the meat's sacrificed. But if there's somebody who does think that those gods are real, and that it's a sin to eat that meat, I'm not going to eat that meat in front of that person, or when I'm with that person, around that person, or at all, because I don't want them to think that I am participating in the sin, and that they are, then I'm showing them the wrong way to do things. And so there is like that, like, okay, if this is going to cause you to stumble, then I don't want to flaunt my freedom in your face. And all that to say, to this day, I've never had a drop of alcohol. That doesn't make me morally superior to anybody. It's just something I just like, just at this point, it's kind of like, well, I haven't had any yet, and I've lived half my life probably, maybe more. I don't know what I'm missing out on, and I don't care. But if you were to take me and pull me aside until I was like 22, and you were to say, all right, well, can people who drink alcohol be Christians? My answer would have been like, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it, right? That's not what Christians do, because the Christians I knew, the culture I knew, and then we were driven to live to that culture, was like, you don't drink alcohol. Christians don't do that. So if you're doing something so the problem, because of when we allow performative Christianity to be what helps us determine, or how we determine who has salvific faith. There it is. I said it. Ding, ding, ding. Salvific faith is on our cultural checklist that we create. It's a problem. And the struggle that we are going to have, that we are in the middle of right now, we continue to have, is that we have culturally tied Christianity, in a lot of places, Christians have tied this to one political party. And regardless of what that political party does or doesn't do, we have tied it to say, well, if you're a Christian, in those strongholds, those conservative Christian places, they've just been like, well, if you're a Christian, you're going to be a Republican. And that's just it. But it's the same thing as saying, well, if you're a Christian, you just won't drink alcohol. Again, that might be the case. I'm a Christian. I still haven't drinking alcohol. But I'm not a Christian because I haven't drinking alcohol. I'm a Christian because I know and love and follow Jesus. You can be a Christian and be a Republican. You can be a Christian and be a Democrat. And some people are not going to love to hear that. But the truth is that because your political dispensation does not determine whether you are a follower of Jesus. What determines whether you're a follower of Jesus is the fruit that you produce. And some people say, well, how could you be a Democrat and be a Christian? Well, because my fruit is not tied up into my political party. I'm not even saying I'm a Democrat, but I'm just saying, like, your fruit does not, are you producing fruit that Paul talks about, that Jesus talks about? Are you a person that helps bring peace and joy and patience and kindness and self-control and love? Are you bringing those things in, and are they just naturally coming out of your life because you're producing the fruit that you're called to be? Because if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to produce the fruit that shows that. And when we allow political identities, when we allow cultural identities, when we allow this only thinking that you've got to be exactly like me, homogeneous, homogenous. Well, I said that word wrong. Really knocking it out of the park. Welcome to season 4. When you allow that to shape who's in and who's out, it allows you to create false enemies. The Democrats are not your enemies, Republicans, and Democrats, the Republicans aren't your enemies. There are people who I would say are very much not leading the church in the right direction. If people are proclaiming that it's right and good for our government to be unjust and to ignore rights of people, then and calling that good, I think this is bad. I think that's easy to say that's not good. I think and I think we have to realize that it's a very difficult place to be able to address and accept a government that is Christian, because the standard is so much higher. And it's not just, we want one that's going to enforce our beliefs or our cultural norms. Because again, what most people are really saying is, like, they want my narrow interpretation of what it means to follow Christ. And if you're not in that, this is how it works. Like, I grew up in this. This is how it works. If you don't believe, or if your belief is off, then your salvation is questioned. Because if my salvation is in my certainty of purity about my theology, and my theology is what I believe about God, and if my salvation is based on how sure I am that I have the right belief and understanding of God, how right and close my beliefs are to the true theology, and not how close my actions, my words, my thoughts, my life is to the life of Jesus, then we've moved the scale to the wrong thing. But that's what conservatism and liberalism will do, right? Like, like, how much? This is just this really hard question. So if you believe, just as an example I was talking about earlier, if you believe that someone who doesn't believe that drinking alcohol is a sin and don't mind if it's done in moderation, if you believe that's outside the belief system of what a Christian believes, what you begin to do is you begin to look at those people who do that, and you're like, Like I said, I argue with a guy who wanted to go tell Jesus, and he was like, man, I'll go to a bar, I'll sit in a bar, I'll sit in a, I'll even drink a beer with someone. And I was like, well, you can't, because you've ruined your witness, because you've violated the sanctity of your theological understandings. And I think a lot about that guy, because I was wrong. I told him I was arguing with him wrong, and I was wrong, and I have repented about that. But when you make theological belief and that yours are the only pure and true ones, and then you make that your determination of whether someone can have salvation, then the danger is that you create a cultural Christianity, and one that doesn't depend upon God's grace at all. Because if you can believe your way into heaven, and vice versa, if you can argue somebody's way into heaven, that's also not what this faith is about. There are many people. It's just true. Like, there are many people who had an encounter with Jesus, made him the Lord and Savior of their life, and they never got to the place where they had a fully formed theology about all the things that we argue and yell about and somehow alleviate and alienate people from other denominations and other doctrines. And they never had any of that, but they died and they're still in heaven. The thief on the cross. You know what he knew? He knew he was a bad person. He knew Jesus was the Son of God, and he knew he needed salvation, and he acknowledged that to Jesus, and Jesus told him, hey, you're going to heaven. Did that thief on the cross know about what to believe about the sovereignty of God? No, Calvin wasn't even like that idea, like that whole doctrine, like that Reformed theology was years later, right? Like he couldn't even have known. If he gets to heaven and he has to take a theology test, he's probably going to get the answers wrong. And again, let me just before you get all fired up and get angry at me. If you already are, sorry. My intention is not to make you angry, make you think. Before you get tired, before you get fired up, I don't think that studying theology, I have a degree in theology. I've studied theology. I love studying theology. I love thinking about it. But the thief on the cross, the man who had his sight restored in John 8, right? I think it's John 8. Look it up. Let me know if I'm wrong. He says such a simple statement. I just love it. He's just like, I don't know, because the Jewish authorities, they call his parents, they call him, and they're just like, how did he heal you? How did this happen? And they're like, we know that this Jesus is a sinner because he healed on the Sabbath, right? And he had you pick up your mat, and the guy who was blind and can now see was just like, well, I don't understand all the theological arguments that you guys are running through right now. I don't understand the anger, or if you're wanting to be his disciples too. But here's what I know. Like, I love it. It's just so simple. It's like, I was blind, and now I see. How do you do it? I don't know. Is he from God? He healed me. I was blind. Now I can see. It's a miracle. I've been blind since I was a boy, since birth, and now I can see. And we run the danger. We run the danger when we take theology and make it culturally where you have to believe everything the same way about everything. And if you don't, then your beliefs make you a heretic and you don't receive salvation. And I think that theology that is divorced from actions, or if you have theology that doesn't produce the kind of fruit that Jesus and Paul are talking about, that is when we need to start investigating that theology. If your theology, if your belief doesn't produce the fruit of the Spirit, doesn't produce the good fruit that Jesus talks about, it doesn't even, it just makes it secondary. It's like, well, yeah, you can do that stuff if you want. That's where I would say we need to start digging into that. If your theology doesn't command you to love your neighbor, if your theology doesn't make you love your enemy, then you're missing something. If your theology doesn't make you love justice, seek mercy, those are secondary to what it means to follow God, because you've got the right theology and your theology says that you don't have to do those things, then your theology is lacking. And that's not, I'm not judging. I'm just telling you, like if you want to be a follower of Jesus, this is what Jesus says. If you want to be a follower of Jesus, you will obey my commands. You will follow what I do. You will follow what I tell you to do. If you, there's no separation. There's no separation between believing what Jesus says and doing what he says. And there's no separation. There's no separation between the means, these methods are not, they're not justice and they're not mercy and they're not, but the ends justify the means, right? God never says that. God never does that. That's not an out that God gives. Jesus says, if you know me, then you will follow me and you'll do these. And he says, and if you don't know me, you could still do all the great things in the world, and I'll say, away, I never knew you. Our salvation starts with that knowledge and understanding of Jesus. But if our salvation doesn't motivate us and make us seek to know what it is to follow and walk and do what Jesus wants us to do and in a Jesus-centered way, then we need to re-examine our theology. And when you can have discussions about whether or not we have to love people, whether or not we have to love the immigrant, the enemy, the person that we think is causing us harm. A lot of times we have those discussions because we're too uncomfortable to think about the fact that we don't even love our neighbors. We don't even love our coworkers. We don't even love the people we go to church with. And I'm not saying that we don't emotionally have oh yeah, I really care about my neighbors, my church friends, my coworkers. And it's okay, but what do you do? How do you show that? How do you demonstrate that love in the way that Jesus talks about? Oftentimes, we get so wrapped up into being angry about what somebody who lives in a states away from us and runs yes, we're affected by what the government does. It's just the truth. But the truth is that I don't really affect. I don't know. I don't know Donald Trump. I don't know J.D. Vance. I don't know those people. I can't speak into their lives, but I do know my coworkers, And sometimes it's easier to put up this person that's super far away and be like, oh, I don't agree with them. It's easier to do that rather than to step across the aisle at church to say, I disagree with you and let's talk about it. But I love you. Let's go have dinner. Let's do life together. Let's talk about why I disagree and why you let's grow this relationship instead of just being like, well, you believe wrong, and so I can't be around you because you don't have pure belief. And I'll just tell you, if you think there are people out there who have everything right about what they believe about God, I 100% will tell you that you're wrong. If you, I'll finish with this thought because it's been an hour already, and I don't know if anybody's gotten anything out of this, but hopefully you have. If you read the book of Job, one of the themes that you're going to, I think, pull out. Now, it's not the only theme. It's not the only thing the book is saying, but it at least is what the book is saying at for one of its themes. And one of its themes is, yes, the world should work like Proverbs says. If you do good things, you get blessings. If you do bad things, you get punishments, you get trials, you get tribulations. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Should we do good things? Yes. Or will we be rewarded for them? Eventually, yes. We've got this account we're building up, right? Stars in our crowns, those type of things. Yes, we should do good things, and not because we think we're going to get rewards, but because to follow Christ means that you want to do good things. You want to avoid the bad things that cause the sin that brings death, tribulations. But the truth is, and if you Job's friends wanted to find some kind of secret sin or reason to justify the trial, the loss, the tribulation that Job was going through. Because if you could say, Job, this is all your fault for that thing that you did, for that lack of faith, for that sin, for that, then they could justify why a righteous man, and the reader, because we get to read this, we know he's a righteous man. God even says, look at Job, my righteous servant. It's like, but if we could just find the reason, that hidden sin that Job had, right? That his friends were just like, look, Job, the world doesn't work that way. If you don't have sin, you wouldn't have this calamity, but you've sinned, and so just admit that you sinned, and Job, of course, is like, look, I would. Trust me. If somebody could point out, if somebody could show me, I would. I don't want to proclaim that I'm innocent before the God, but I do. I'm innocent. I didn't do this. And so we go through this whole back and forth with Job's friend being like, admit your sin. And Job going, I didn't sin. This is so unfair. And then Job's friend being like, how dare you accuse God of being unfair? And Job saying, look, I would like to not have to do that, but I didn't sin. And yet here I am. I've lost all my families, and I've lost all my wealth, and I've got all these boils on my skin. And that seems pretty unfair to me. And so all I can conclude is that God's an unfair person that deals unfairly with us. And so we get to the point where Job is finally like they have gone through this circular again and again and again to the point in Job finally God shows up. And here's the thing, and this is why I say, if you think anybody has theology fully figured out and 100% right about everything belief, they're wrong. They don't, because God basically says this to Job: you don't understand anything if you think that you can understand me. And not in a harsh way. I don't think God wasn't like, how dare you, Job? But instead he was like, do you want to know, we get caught up into this reducing God down to something that fits within our ability to understand and think and reason. And when we do that, when we put God in that kind of a box, we reduce who God is. And so God comes to Job and he's like, Job, let me ask you some questions. And then he begins just to talk about all the cosmological things that God knows about that Job obviously doesn't, and we don't either. And he has like, he's like, these mystical beasts, he's like, I can control them. Could you even do that? And Job's like, Job at the beginning just like, I'm shutting my mouth, right? And so at least one theme of Job that we have to wrestle with is the fact that is a reminder that God does agree that in a perfect, ideal world, if you do good, you'll get good. If you do bad, you'll get bad. But because of the messiness of sin and the messiness of this world, it doesn't work out exactly like that. And what we have to understand is that we, as humans, can't fully understand all the things that God can understand. And so what we're called to do is to do our best to understand all the things we can understand and to live in the way that Jesus told us to live, and to live in those things that we don't fully understand and haven't fully worked out, and we need to be aware of the things that we are culturally motivated by and in our beliefs and our theology. But we don't have all the answers, and we don't have God in a box, and we can't fully explain how the world works. And when we try, we fall short. And that's okay, because we're human. And so that's why I think that's why when Paul comes back and says, I don't have all the like, you know, you've got, he's living in a contemporary time when people are talking about Plato and Aristotle and how the world was made and how things, and he's like, all of this philosophy, and he studied all that, and he was a very smart man, and he knew all those things, and he was like, I don't have a system worked out for how, he's like, I don't have impressive wisdom that I can bring to you, but what I bring to you is this, that I was lost and now I'm saved. I was broken and now I've been healed. I was blind and now I see. I was without Jesus and now I have Jesus, and the difference is Jesus. And that has changed how I live my life. And for those of us who can say that, whether or not we get all the other parts right, whether or not we get all the theology right, whether or not we get every action right, when we say, you know what, I was lost and now I'm saved because I met Jesus, and now I do my best. I do my best every day, I do my best to live like Jesus would want me to live. That's what God wants. He wants us to love him and love others. And we can worry about whether or not we can love, what it means to love some distant political person or some group that really we don't interact with. But if we do that and we neglect loving our neighbors, loving our enemies around us, and enemies, again, is such a hard word, because I don't know that I have enemies, but I do have those people that I have been like, I don't want to be around you, I don't like you. Yeah, it fits into that, but I should love you like I love myself. I should repair what I can repair. I should have honest boundaries and conversation with you, because that's what loving is. And I failed at that in a lot of ways, and I still do. I'm not perfect. So we can push things out to hypothetical, because we don't have those relationships with those people, and be like, oh, well, do you have to love, Vladimir Putin? Yeah, if you're in his circle, yeah. But you should pray for him. You're probably never gonna have a conversation with him. Probably so you can pray for him, but it shouldn't be, we have so much work to do with the people in our families and the community and the churches and the schools and where we're at, the people around us. We have so much that we need to talk to them about and to be a part of their lives, that we can distract ourselves by thinking about the polarizing people that are out there. And instead, those people aren't your friends. But you have a community that surrounds you. How are you building up that community? How are you impacting that community? And how is God calling you to live that out? That's the question. The question is not, does God say I have to love ICE? No, because ICE is an organization. But if you have someone who works for ICE in your family, in your church, in your community, yeah, figure out how to love them. If you have somebody who protests ICE in your family, in your church, in your community, figure out how you're supposed to love them. Because none of those labels give you an out. Jesus makes it pretty clear. Do you interact with someone? Are you part of their life? Yeah, how do you love them? Not how do you gussy up feelings about them, but how do you knowingly act? How do you think through how you act? How do you have conversations that show that you love them? Because it reflects the character of who you are back to God, and reflects to them who you believe God is about how you treat them. And you're not always going to get it right. I don't always get it right, definitely. But that's the call. That's the call. If the call is not to declare devotion to and love to some distant politician or king or president or ruler, how do you love the people in your community, the people in your town, the people in your circle? That's what you got to figure out. Because how you do that reflects what you truly believe about who Jesus is and what he believes about you. All right, my friends. Welcome to season 4. Hope that you found some things to chew on and think through, and that it'll help you chase after Jesus more. We'll see you next week. At least hear from me next week. Thanks for listening, and keep chasing after Jesus with all that you do.